All right, let's see if my camera's actually recording or not. Ooh, it is. Good. This camera won't quite fit in the gimbal in the intended fashion. I put it in reverse for it to actually, oops, get the trekking poles in the right place. For it to actually work, the camera's a little too thick and curved on the back side, and it won't fit in the mount the right way around, so I have to hold the gimbal backwards for some of this. So anyway, we're getting down to the lower part of the Spring Ridge Trail, and in a moment we'll see the peaks where we didn't get to, but we're on the way. Well, we'll get them next time. I love hiking in this weather. It's quite windy. It's actually about 70 degrees, but with the wind it's a little bit chilly, especially during the big gusts. And anyway, I love the weather here. It's fun to get out and hiking this. So, hopefully up over my shoulder you can see the top of the hill and you turn the phone around and make sure I'm showing it to you properly here. Yes. So, right up there, the figure out how to work this gimbal here. It's a little too far. There we go. So right there, nope, let me sun my finger. Yes, right about here and here are the two twin peaks that are at the top of Windy Hill, and we got about halfway up to them today. Now we're going to head on back to the Jeep. This trail is called Spring Ridge Trail because it has many springs along it, well, several anyway, and places where sometimes they're actual springs that have a pretty good flow, and sometimes they're just places where the ground gets damp, especially in the winter, spring, and summer after there's been a good bit of rain. This time of the year, most of them are dried up, but that's where the trail gets its name. I also like these old trees here with all this, it looks like Spanish moss, but it's really called usnea. It's that stuff blowing in the wind there. It's a combination of I guess it's a lichen. It's a fungus and an algae that take up residence together and help each other out symbiotically, I guess is the word, and it forms a lichen. Oh, and to remember that, there's this horrible jingle, a little children's story to teach them about this, and it's called Freddy Fungus and Alice Algae took a lichen to each other and set up housekeeping together. And there's more to it than that, but that tells you the fungus and the algae live together and they form a lichen. So we're coming up here to the Meadow Trail junction that we came up earlier. The Spring Ridge Trail goes down to the left, but we're going to head off here to the right. Way back. video, I want to see how this new cell phone camera does. Here as the light gets dimmer, it's about 7:30 in the evening, and the light is definitely getting dimmer, and I want to see how this 4K HDR video recording works in the lower light situations. This camera can also this phone actually has two cameras on the front. One is oops, gotta learn to control this thing better. One is the normal camera, and then it has also a monochrome camera that is used in conjunction with it for really low light situations. And you can, according to the advertising blurbs, take videos in situations where you can't see anything by the eye. As long as there's a little light, that wide open monochrome camera will capture it. But you can't do 4K HDR video with that. You have to go back down to ordinary HD, full HD, I think, to do the monochrome capture. And of course the footage would be grainy to some extent, but you could still see what's going on in a very dark room or dark night. We're kind of back in the woods now. The Spring Ridge Trail is, a lot of it is out in the open, as you saw in the last video clip. But this lower part goes in and out of the woods in several places. In general, I prefer to hike in wooded areas. Get less sun exposure, and I think it's just prettier, but it is good to have those beautiful views and vistas every now and then. So far, this camera is doing a lot better than my old ones. If you watched my last video or two, were recorded with my old 5-year-old camera, which did do 4K video recording, but you could only record for 4 or 4.5 minutes before it would overheat and shut down. And if it shut down on you, you'd lose whatever video it took. This camera can also overheat according to the manual, but if it does, it will save the video before it shuts down. That's a great improvement over the previous one. I don't know what the video is going to look like in the final product, but looking at the screen of the camera while I'm shooting it, this actually looks quite bright, even though it's definitely getting close to sunset here, and the sun is way on down past the top of the Coast Range Mountains. So we're definitely in the deeper shade now. Here we're coming back up on the landslide area I mentioned before, with the there it is up there, the sharp break, the sharp cliff-like small cliff where landslide originated, and then slid down this hillside and left all this lumpy stuff down here. All that lumpy stuff. It's fun to walk through areas and try to deduce what went on there in the recent to distant past. This area was 50, 100 years ago, 150 years ago was, well, 100 years ago was mostly ranch land, I think. It was being farmed for one thing or another. either fruits. Silicon Valley used to be called, I think, plum something. Plums and prunes were a big part of the Silicon Valley economy before it was Silicon Valley, and other fruits too. The orchards were quite extensive, I've been told. And so it's fun to figure out what's going on. I mentioned earlier we're in Portola Valley. The Portola Valley Town Center, there's still some plum trees there that are very old. And I've seen pictures of that area dating back to about 1900 or 1910. And those same plum trees are still there and they look the same. So they were mature trees back then. Now they're 100 or 110 years older and still have beautiful flowers and blossoms in the spring. So it's fun to find the traces of what went on before, either in history or geology or whatever. Of course, this area has a lot of history going back way before any white settlers were here. I think the first Spanish settlers came through sometime in the 1700s and set up the Spanish missions up and down California and Mexico. I think there were 26 or 28 missions. We're near the northern part. I think Mission Dolores in San Francisco is one of them, and there are several here in the Bay Area or nearby. But before that, of course, this was all Native American land, and there are several tribes that lived or groups that lived in the area. I think this area was primarily inhabited, called the Ohlone Indians, O-H-L-O-N-E. And in one of the other preserves, you can see this big sandstone, I think it's sandstone rock boulder, and it has a dozen or so round holes in it, kind of hemispherical holes that were used for apparently many centuries by the Ohlone Indians to grind acorns and make meal, which could be treated to make them less acidic, I think, and then you could actually eat it, cook with it, and that was one of their staples in their diet. It's interesting to go and look at that stone, and it's about 10 feet across and got a dozen or so of these pits in it that were ground by hand as the Ohlone used them to prepare their acorn meal. Possibly other things too, I don't know. All right, so I'm going to shut this video off and restart it here in just a moment. I'm not sure how big the file is going to be on this, and I want to make sure it's not going to cause troubles to transfer if I let it run too long.